few days ago, I came across my very first writing. Yeah, I'm in the park. And I came to the park to read my very the first thing I ever wrote. And it was 2 days after I had this incident, which you'll find out about in this story. Um, and I started writing. And the name, and believe it or not, this was written in 2014, Metamorph, the encounter. So this is only a part one. Metamorph, the encounter. And I forgot to bring my stand to hold my phone, so listen, it's sitting on the park bench. But as long as you hear the story, here goes. Metamorph, the encounter. So the introduction is introverted and very spiritual mom, Crystal, facing many challenges raising children and losing every fight against many injustices. One night, with instructions from God, metamorphed into a black butterfly as an escape from her stressful life. After her flight, she lands in a kneeling position at a secret outdoor altar surrounded by a wooded area. Going into prayer, God gives Crystal wisdom and understanding, then instructs her to continue to stand, endure, and leave all battles for Him. God gives Crystal a kingdom assignment. With all attacks from all sides, God sends His angels, who are fiercer than any human, to guard Crystal and her children until His Son returns to clear all wicked and evil from His earth. Crystal begins to work full time for God. This is the actual story. Crystal had a happy childhood. She knew that her family had little and did the best that they could for her. Crystal was a very grateful child, and since a child, she always found ways to help around the house. She, along with her siblings, would entertain their parents and grandparents. Her young life was good. After graduating high school, Crystal got pregnant and worked multiple jobs to provide for herself and to get ready for her baby that was on the way. She was alone when she delivered her baby, but the father of her child soon came into their life. Eventually, they made a home of their own and had a couple more children. That relationship lasted 12 years. Crystal moved on to marry and have one child with another man. That relationship ended after 5 years. She decided to stay single and focus solely on raising her children. From the time her eldest child was 6 months, Crystal worked in the service industry. Crystal enjoyed the work. She did managing, supervising, and building strong customer service teams and helping to increase sales for sales teams. Crystal herself was responsible for earning tens of millions in revenue every year. But she did not get paid for her work. Still, she worked with a standard of excellence that earned her many verbal and written compliments and even an award. But no company would pay Crystal a fair wage. Everyone who was not black like her got paid double and even triple her salary. Many were non producers who earned the company no money. Usually, their work resulted in losses, which Crystal always took and turned into a profit for each company. You see, Crystal was usually the only black person in her department or in the company. She was discriminated against whilst being admired, called names while being praised, and talked about, some bad, some good. Companies and their employees thought that a black person should not get proper recognition or pay above non-black people. It's an industry belief. Although Crystal tried fighting for a fair wage, no human being would find her worthy. Not even judges in the courts of law or employee rights agencies. Even after an employer made a threat against her life, was no cause for alarm according to the courts and the human beings she hired to represent her. All sided and plotted against her. Later in her life, Crystal learned that her life was a test. and that everyone that came against her did so because she had an anointing that everyone but her could see. The great God of Israel would visit Crystal and bring her to his secret altar, deep in the woods and far and high above upon a sacred mountain. There is where Crystal learned all about who she is, why her life turned out the way it did, and how she would be used for the new kingdom to soon come. Crystal also learned that the Most High God would avenge her as he uses her to usher out the current world, as he and his only begotten Son bring in his new earth and most righteous kingdom. Living in New York her whole life, Crystal began receiving dreams and visions of different cities. She knew that it was God communicating with her to let her know that it was time for a change. Crystal had been a New Yorker her whole life and was afraid to pick her 4 children up and relocate to a different state. God continued nudging her to move. After praying over a year for the courage to move, God gave Crystal the courage she needed to start having necessary conversations toward the move. She wanted to continue working in the service industry she had always loved working in. She'd made a name for herself and built quite a reputation. In the service industry, Crystal was referred to as the infamous Crystal Rogers. Searching for change, she started praying for direction. Her Lord chose a southern state with many companies in the same industry she'd worked in for over 30 years. The pay scale in the South was much less than in New York, so she realized that she would be taking a major cut in pay, even though she had a stellar resume with letters of recommendations attached. Pay offered in the South was just low. After many months of telephone interviews, Crystal agreed to take a position with a company that said they'd heard her name and needed her talent to help grow their company. The company owner explained that he'd been in business for many years and had not been able to grow his company much. Crystal decided to take the job to help grow that company. She knew she could do it because she'd been growing businesses for decades. Crystal gave her employer many months of notice and began making plans. A couple months before her move, her current employer asked her which company she would be working for, and she shared that information. A day later, a young man in the company came to her desk to tell her that their employer told him that when she moves, the job she agreed to take won't be there for her, and that she'll end up somewhere working on fries. Yep, that's what I was told. After telling my boss, I'll go back to the story in a second, but after telling the company I was working for, a manager who I was going to work for when I moved down to the South, I don't know what happened, but somebody came to me, somebody working in that same company, a friend of mine, and said they were talking with him, and he said by the time she gets down there, he's not going to let her have the job, and she'll end up somewhere working on fries. So something was being planned, but stay tuned. A day later, a young man in the company came to her desk to tell her that their employer told him that when she moves, the job she agreed to take won't be there for her, and that she'll end up somewhere working on fries. Okay. Crystal laughed because she had already spoken to her future employer, and he had hired her over the telephone. She did not think much about what her current employer said. Besides, other employees had been telling her that the employer was bitter and angry with her for leaving their company. 3 days before her move, the new employer emailed her to ask her when she would arrive. And she answered him. Moving day came, so she packed her 4 children in her car and drove over 900 miles to her new home state in Georgia. The day she arrived, she called her new employer to ask if she could come by the office to meet the crew and learn a bit and learn a bit about the computer system. She got no answer right away. The following day, he called her to say that he could not pay the salary he'd already agreed on. Crystal moved over 910 miles from everyone she knew with confirmation that she had a job and now no job. She realized that she had been set up by evil people within the industry. While she sat and pondered what to do next, she received a call from a lady she'd worked with twice years before. The lady told her that the owner of the company was looking for her. The lady said that she had given her telephone number to her boss. Crystal asked the lady what he wanted, and the lady said she did not know. But she knew that at the last minute, he was moving his family to where Crystal was. Crystal asked the lady for his number so she could call him to see what he wanted of her. When Crystal called him, he asked that she not take any other job. He said his company was failing and he needed her to help get his company back on track. A week later, they met at his office and talked about salary. He said that his company was broke and could not pay much. She told him that when his business begins to profit, they would revisit the salary. Within 2 months, Crystal caused sales to skyrocket. The sales teams, customers, and employees all praised the quick turnaround. There was a lot of jealousy because of her successes, but she continued to work with her usual standard of excellence. One day, in her second month, a company director asked her if she was getting a fair salary, and she told him she was not. He told Crystal that since he'd been with the company, he had never seen sales like what she was producing, and she was not a sales agent, nor did she get any commission payments. The director said that money was better than good and that she needed to ask for a raise immediately. Crystal emailed the owner and asked that they meet to talk about her salary. A few days later, they met. When she asked him to increase her salary, he told her that she was no spring chicken. He asked her who else did she think would even hire her at that point. At her age, his words were damaging, just terrible. $1 per hour was the raise that he gave her. When Crystal got home that night, she tried to make sense of the conversation and couldn't. The company even started deducting money from her salary for no reason, stealing from me, the person that caused them to prosper. After years of them not being able to give Christmas bonuses and gifts, they were able to do those things upon her return to the company. Staying calm while planning to leave the company, one day Crystal asked the owner to hire a person for her to train because she would be planning to move back to New York. He told her that she was not leaving his company or even leaving the state. A few months later, she asked him again to hire someone because she would be leaving once she found the right job. Again, he told her that she would not be leaving his company or the state. On the next day, he called her to his office to ask her if she knew that there was a contract out on her life. Crystal was in shock, and she asked him what he was saying. Her question to him was, "Are you saying that I am going to die?" And he threw his head back and laughed like a madman. After asking him a couple more times, she quickly left him as he continued to laugh like a madman. When Crystal got back to her desk, she told the other employees, and they told her to be careful. One employee mentioned that they all have a gun in their desk drawer. A warehouse manager told her to stay on the lookout. This was all too much for Crystal. She needed to get out quickly. Although she didn't want to, she called her former employer, who said she would end up on Fry somewhere, to ask if they had any opportunities, and they said no. That was to be expected since everyone in the industry is mostly related in some way. After sending her resume to some service companies in New York, no one would hire her or even interview her. She later learned that she had been colluded against and blackballed in that industry and was told that they ordered witchcraft spirits to follow her everywhere and to cause her financial destruction. Well, the day her life was threatened, she returned home and had dinner with her children. After her children went to bed, she cried. Crystal replayed the moment when the employer told her that she was no spring chicken and the threat against her life and all of the discriminatory remarks employees said about black people. Crystal asked God why he would have her. Crystal asked God why he would have her move 910 miles with her 4 children only to have her get abused in so many ways. God answered and told her to fret not, for the same employer that inflicted pain upon you will one day bring you great blessings. Crystal dried her eyes and said, "What?" It made no sense to her, but she believed in God. Crystal asked God what she should do to ease the pain. In the middle of the quiet of that night, God instructed her to drive to her favorite park. It was a few blocks away, and to her, the park was magical and majestic even. When she arrived at the park, she asked God if she was there to pray. God instructed her to walk to the 3 crooked trees. She was surprised God knew about the trees that she secretly pays respect to and admire. Then she thought, of course, God would know. In the dark, standing before the 3 crooked trees, she heard God say, "Run through the trees." Crystal thought to herself, "If I run, I'll have to stop when I get to the trees." God then said, "Don't stop. Keep running." She thought, "I'm obedient to God, so I must, but I'm about to knock myself out." Then she thought, "Bet God would get me up in the morning just in time to get my children to school on time." Laughing out loud, she took off because she always did what God instructed her to do. 2 to 3 steps more to the tree, and she closed her eyes. Just as she braced for pain, Crystal began to feel air and wind. She could not stop running. Crystal began to feel light on her feet. Afraid because she thought she might be falling off a cliff, she opened her eyes, speechless. Crystal recognized that she was no longer a woman, but instead a butterfly, a black butterfly, soaring across the night air, through the park, around the trees, over the picnic tables, through the gazebo, then out of the park and farther from home. Crystal felt incredibly free and asked God to guide her and keep her safe. God commanded her to fly on. At last, God instructed Crystal to land. Since flying and landing were new to Crystal, she closed her eyes and landed. When she opened her eyes, she was a woman again and on her knees. Ahead and right before her was a giant altar made of stone. To her left, right, behind her, and past the altar were trees and forests beyond. Crystal fell on her face. Crystal fell on her face and cried like never before. Not out of fear. Her cry was one of gratitude. Gratitude for being in this place of total peace, a type of peace she'd wanted her entire life, even from a child. Over and over she cried out, thanking God. She called on Yeshua, the Savior, giving honor, glory, and many thanks, and she returned to her knees. God said to her, "You are on my earth, and you are here because you are my chosen child. Fret not in my ways, as I am strengthening you and preparing you for your blessed life. For I am strengthening you and preparing you for your blessed life. You have walked on my earth as a light, leading and teaching my ways. You have guided many of my lost children out of darkness and into my arms. Some of my children have and will continue to refuse your light. Again, fret not, because many more of my children will come back to me through you." Crystal smiled. She smiled because she had not ever felt so special or important to anyone. She had no idea that she was being used her whole life. She never felt love like she did at that moment. This meant that the Most High God trusted her. Her. People say I love you all the time, but when God gets your attention, tells you, then shows you, there is nothing like it. At that moment, the smile could not have been slapped off of her face. Crystal and God conversed on many topics, including her childhood, motherhood, relationships, and more. God gave her an understanding that everything that happened and every person that she'd ever met was for a greater purpose. God told Crystal that he had dispatched angels to fiercely protect her and her children until his son, Christ, returns, to rid his earth of all manner of evil and wickedness. That time, in that special place, on that holy ground, with her loving father, was everything to her. Crystal knew that her life would never be the same ever again. She wasn't sure how, who, where, or when, but whatever happened, she'd know why. Crystal knew that God had her in a process. She had to become more fearless and courageous in order to do the work of God. That night marked her new beginning. All thanks and all praises to the Most High God. When the time came to return to where she started, Crystal was nervous and excited. God instructed her to run toward any tree, so she eyed a large tree, then she closed her eyes and took off. Again, she soared as a black butterfly being led by the Most High. When she made it back to where she started, she walked to her car and drove back home. That night, she could not sleep. Her thoughts were on the conversations she had with God and the sacred, enchanted place she'd been in. Crystal knew that never could anything ever get to her again, and that she was protected and would always be taken care of. She knew that there would always be tests along her path, as she began to carry out her assignment. She knew now not to give the tests any of her energy. By continuing to keep faith in God, she automatically passed every test, like she'd been doing for so many years. Crystal began to better understand that not sinning, living with a high standard of excellence, and trusting God caused God to grant her peace, rest, and purpose all at the same time. Crystal wondered when she might get to approach the altar again. She hoped soon. Anyway, although she did not know where to begin, she was excited to start her assignment. It was a big assignment, but she knew that God would send her all of the instructions and helpers that she would need. Crystal drifted off into a deep sleep with a big smile still on her face. So that was the first thing I ever wrote. And that I wrote, I think it was like a Thursday that my boss told me I was no spring chicken. No, it was a Thursday when he told me that there's a contract out of my life. And so I went home, and that was a Thursday. I took off Friday because I called like all the salespeople and was like, he threatened me. And went through the weekend just writing and finished it in a weekend. I wrote this in the weekend. Saturday, Sunday, boom, wrote. I started thinking about it that Friday, but I was on so many phone calls. And then by Saturday, I just sat down and wrote this and finished it up on Sunday. So my first writing, and this is a true story, not fiction. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. Shalom.